Hello. Oh, okay. I'm very excited to be here, and I'm glad that you're stuck in a room with me and are forced to listen to my talk about fashion. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so I didn't actually know there was going to be an intro, so here's my introduction slide. I'm Victoria, Communications Director at Kit Fox Games. So we're a small indie studio in Montreal, Canada, but I'm originally from Vancouver, so this is a place that's close to my heart. Yeah, so we're Kit Fox. Again, we're from Montreal. We're like a 9-person studio. You might know us from making games like Boyfriend Dungeon. And I saw someone in here with a Boyfriend Dungeon t-shirt, and I was too shy to say anything, but thank you for supporting our game. It's very nice of you. We're also publishing other games like Dwarf Fortress and Six Ages, and we more recently announced Lucifer Within Us, and another game that we're publishing, which is Mondo Museum. So we have a lot going on. But the reason I'm here is to talk about fashion. And why did I decide fashion was a worthy topic? So when I was younger, I played a lot of games, but I only talked about the games that I thought were cool, so like Grand Theft Auto or whatever. It was a weird time. But secretly, I sunk a lot of hours into games like Rory World, the My Scene and Barbie games online, which were fantastic, and Doll Makers, which was a huge part of my life, and apparently others too. Thank you. I feel really validated right now. But yeah, I didn't talk about this because I thought it was a weird, like, typical girly thing to do, and when you're in games, you're not supposed to talk about, dress-up games. And the more I talked about this subject, the more other people actually agreed with me that they had loved dress-up games, but it never really came up because it didn't seem like a thing. So I thought that somewhere along the way, when these games were really popular, we lost them really soon. So right now, games have typically been stuck on 2 major ways of thinking, which is domination and force. What I think fashion does for games is that it breathes in the power of expression and aesthetics, and how it explores a different type of play and how that affects players. I'm not necessarily here to talk about what good and bad fashion is, but more how we have ignored it as a serious mechanic or information rich piece of storytelling. It's really nebulous and it's extremely subjective. What I think good fashion is also who I consider attractive, right? And again, it's not about good or bad. It's for you to understand that no matter what, the things your character wears has meaning, and we often forget about that. And to be clear, this is all fashion. Whether you're wearing sweatpants, whether you're wearing just jeans and a t-shirt, or you're literally at like a high-end fashion show. We're game designers, we're not all fashion designers, that's totally fine. But now that I have that out of the way, a lot of the question I got was, why care? Why care at all about fashion? And I get it. But the reason you should care about fashion is also the reason it kind of sucks sometimes. Bill Cunningham, once a fashion columnist for the New York Times, said that fashion is the armor to survive the realities of everyday life. And I think that applies both online and offline. In a real-life context, fashion matters more than you think. Even if you don't think you care, they have significance. Even our favorite E3 presenter tweeted about how their coat was basically their armor, and I totally agree. And I get it. Caring about clothes can seem really superficial. Amazing games get made without, runway looks, and that's totally fine. But games can be more, and we can do more with them. So why not consider new possibilities with fashion in games? Okay, so to get to my first point, pretend you're meeting this person for the first time. Woo. What opinions have you formed based on that quick meeting? It only takes about 2 seconds to form an opinion on a person or a character, and you can get a lot from it, whether that's age, socioeconomic status, occupation, sexuality, personality, that kind of thing. It's the first impression, and sometimes it's really flawed, but sometimes it's useful, and nevertheless, it's unavoidable. For example, regardless if you knew this character or not, you can probably tell she's a doctor from the white coat, except she's not a normal doctor because she has the dress, she has the shoes and the accessories, and there's something a little bit rebellious about her. And when I brought this up to random people who didn't know who she was and that she was from Persona, this is kind of like all the traits that they could kind of understand about her just from the glance that they got. And you can use this to your advantage, right? You can subvert expectations, or you can carry it on, and this is how you can expect this from the character. Then this other character gives us a very different message. She's a student, judging from the skirt, but she's well covered in tights and a turtleneck, so you can kind of tell she's a bit more conservative, maybe obeys dress code better than the doctor does. So my first point is that fashion is information rich. It's its own complex language, it's meaningful, it's symbolic, with different contexts and moods. So the first reason it matters is that it can increase our understanding of worlds, whether that's a certain era you want to draw attention to, whether you want to deepen understanding of your world without using walls and walls and walls of text, which is something I honestly dislike. And again, fashion doesn't need to necessarily look good. How do you denote a villain versus a hero or someone's background? And what if you used it as an indication of something meaningful, like a festival or a culture, or a beloved childhood t-shirt? How can you tell their story? Clothes are clues to tell your players how to feel about the characters, so maximize your 2 seconds. When things go right, you get a world filled with context without needing to explain it all the time. But when it goes wrong, you get fashion that lacks a lot of information or context. In other words, it's meaningless. To me, a lot of fashion in games falls under this. They don't really bring anything to the game or to the character, and they don't do anything to design or feel. In other words, it's information poor. The kind of the moments that make you go, what happened here? Like in this next slide. I love Rex, and Xenoblade 2 is great. But if you don't know who Rex is, do you know what they do? They're a diver. That's their occupation. I don't know what a lower thigh gap is needed in diving, but anyways, right? So this doesn't bring anything to it. Like, we're laughing at it now, but it honestly, like, it's fine. It's great if you could just communicate more with the outfit. And the next slide is Jill Valentine from Resident Evil 3. She's the main character, and she's supposed to be memorable, but nothing really much about the outfit is memorable, and it's kind of memorable now because the franchise is so popular, but otherwise there's nothing that says anything about Jill in this outfit. So a note to make here is that there is a fantastic Polygon art video about JRPG fashion and its influences, and I highly recommend you watch that. And I'm not here to obviously just shit on JRPG fashion. I just want to talk about, again, that it's fine to be weird and break the mold. You don't have to impress me to make it good fashion. It's just that do it knowing that no matter what you put on your character, it's going to say something. And if it says nothing, then that might be worse too. And even if we ignore how bad fashion provides nothing to the games they're a part of, it also takes away from it. In fact, it might counteract the mood or feel of the game, providing a really jarring experience. There's been numerous times I've been in boss fights and I've been wearing something ridiculous, and it just didn't feel right to me. So my next point kind of slides into how game and fashion has real-world meaning, whether it's internal or external. Fashion is personal expression, and that expression has power. So a quick study from Quantic Foundry, who interviewed gamers about their primary gaming motivations. What you'll see is that both women and non-binary people, fantasy plays a huge role in the games they play. Fantasy is defined here as being someone or somewhere else, and I think fashion plays a huge role in this. And for men, FYI, fantasy was number 4. And this makes sense, right? You want to feel connected to the character you play, the role you're in. You want to be able to express who you are or want to be in fantasy context. And even if you're not playing yourself necessarily, you want to be able to feel a connection. And this applies to many different games. So Halo Reach's customization was wonderful, where you could customize each piece of armor. But when people saw the first glance at Halo 5, they weren't very happy with the customization. You want to feel powerful. You don't want to feel like you're wearing plastic in a game where you're, shooting people. And clothes capture that. It matters to any type of gamer. And personally, it had an effect on self-expression for me. Anytime I was afraid to rock a sexy outfit, or maybe I wanted to wear more masculine clothes, I would wear them in games to see how they made me feel and to see if they made me feel uncomfortable. Dressing up a character can help you aspire to something personally if you wanted to. But of course, the personal aspect of fashion can make it go terribly awry. Due to fashion having such personal and cultural meaning to it, it's really easy to mess up sometimes. That's not necessarily from a place of badness, but more that we don't talk about it. So I'm going to talk about it. Okay, so yeah. Boob vacuum. It hurts every time I see it. So yeah, there's always been the idea of sexualized fashion. I've come to have really complicated feelings about it, and I recommend reading Maddie Meyer's fantastic piece about the inexplicable sexiness of Ivy Valentine on Kotaku. As she writes, these outfits don't tell us anything about the characters wearing them. Sometimes they contradict the stories and personalities of the women in them, and I agree. She does mention reclaiming sexiness for ourselves, though I find the problem with this is that you usually have to have this as your default option, and then the kind of justification behind it, if they have one, is just really long-winded and doesn't make sense. And it's just, I don't like it. And to be clear, sexiness isn't inherently bad, but that doesn't mean it needs to be used all the time, or that it has to be used at all. Sexiness isn't the only way to show female empowerment. So moving away from that just a little bit, I have another way fashion can be misused. And right now you need to imagine a world where Americans, and by Americans I mean literally just, let's say just all of America, because that's sometimes what people think of Asia. Imagine a world where all Americans are only seen wearing cameo and the US flag. They're always loud and angry, and that's the only way you can see them in books, movies, TVs, games, and this goes on for years and years and years. This is the most reductive way I can kind of explain what I want to talk about next, which is that clothes reflect culture. Issues of cultural appropriation and diversity go far beyond the game industry, but that doesn't mean we can't talk about it and we can't do better and we can't make a difference and still have fun. A great example of using fashion for cultural understanding is the Geeky Bayou project by Karis Locke. She's been reimagining Southeast Asian garment design for various games and movies, and her aim isn't directly to convert a character's existing clothing into local outfits, but to express the character's personality, beliefs, and history using textiles, motifs, and silhouettes. The boat agrees. These designs are a fun way to learn about the history behind traditional outfits, and in this way, clothes can reflect culture. And you can still have fun with it. But of course, we're all game makers, and we need to make money, and fashion can help with that. For example, I've never wanted to play League of Legends, but I started seeing this all over my Twitter timeline, and that's how I found the Popstars music video. I heard the artist wasn't treated great for this, so that's unfortunate. But at the time, I legitimately spent an hour researching KDA and League of Legends. And in business terms, it's really good. You can go viral with it if you have really good fashion. And if you want to make money, actual money, you can sell merch because people want to embody the heroes they see online, and that gives them power. Fashion is one of the best ways to do that. Right? So Red Dead Redemption has a physical clothing line. There's, of course, Lightning from Final Fantasy had a whole Louis Vuitton collaboration. Then, of course, there's the Overwatch seasonal skins and their massive financial success with that. I won't discuss the ethics of it, but we're going to move on. There's a whole section of gamers out there who can and will die for a good fashion game, like me. So that leads me to my next point, which is that there's actually no real fashion games or mechanics that I can find on right now. What sucks a lot about fashion in games is that it's really underutilized, and there are so many different ways we've learned to shoot someone, and I don't know why we can't explore something else for once, please. So there's not even a fashion game section on Steam, so hint, hint, wink, wink. There's a market out there. There's a gap in the market out there. And searching online doesn't help too much if you want more than just a browser dress-up game, and the PC games are super old, and if they're on mobile, they're probably locked behind microtransactions. Though that isn't to say they are bad, like in this case. This is Love Nikki. Yes, thank you. This is an amazing game. Okay, I don't know how to explain it without just gushing on for an hour about it, but it's basically revolved all around fashion, and you have story quests, and you battle other people, and there's powers, and there's different contexts with the clothes, and also you can evolve the clothes, which is kind of the best part. It's like Pokemon, but with clothing, and you battle it out. It's great. Play it. Actually, if you don't want to spend a lot of money, don't play it. But where fashion really falls flat is with AAA games. They're usually cosmetic, which is totally fine, but we aren't nearing a point where we're doing anything more with it. Integrating clothes as an actual mechanic could create a whole new world of gameplay. The Hitman series has been one of the nice exceptions to this, where you can sneak around depending on the outfit that you have. But in essence, fashion games have been mainly seen as a more feminine interest, but I'd like to challenge that, just like how a lot of people thought that they wouldn't like dating sims, that when they tried Boyfriend Dungeon, they have been really into dating sims. We don't need to create a game that's hyper-focused on one gender. There's obviously a large drawing communities for it, which we see in things like fashion souls. Bottom line, fashion is fun, and it's games, which are primarily for fun. So I do have a little bit of a recap and tips for this. This is what fashion can do for your games. The three main reasons we talked about was that it's informative, it's expressive, and it provides fun. Keeping these in mind while you design characters, work on customization choices or mechanics will help you, and think about what style brings to the table. Fashion, like character design, is an answer to a question. How do we express a fictional character in a real-world context? Unsure of how to start, I do have a few tips. The first is to start by thinking of clothes as a story. Even if you yourself just pick up a t-shirt and jeans every single day, and you think that you don't care what you wear, that says something about you. What does a single piece of clothing mean to your character? Second, know where your character will appear, whether that's in a modern nightclub or in a fantasy setting. Where your world is will define what your character wears. Third, every piece has meaning, using accessories and details, all of that. But remember that just adding random details doesn't equate to better fashion. You have to be deliberate with your fashion and symbolism, and don't forget that color plays a huge role in this. Another way is to research real subjects. The real world is full of inspiration. Stay curious about it. Watch a runway show and look at the themes they play around with. They're a whole treasure trove of inspiration. Pay attention and be curious about why certain clothes make the news. There's a lot of resources out there for you, right? Fashion is literally its own entire industry. Books, movies, Pinterest, lookbook.new, reality TV shows like Project Runway. Find interest in the world and find other things to be interested about. What games can you make from it, and what can you do with it? So an example for this is Sunder from Boyfriend Dungeon. He's one of the dateable weapons in the game. And like looking at this, what can you kind of already tell about his personality? And we actually redesigned him to look like this. So why the old and new redesign? His original character direction was attractive, long hair, a little shallow, owns a nightclub, and we knew he works out a lot, so we gave him a gym attire. But this gave the impression that his primary character trait was that he went to the gym, and maybe that's not very fashionable. So we revised it to be more in line with how he wanted the player to feel about him, that he's brazenly flirty and confident, and he's interested. So we think the new design is more effective at communicating that. Another game that really worked on their fashion was Monster Prom. And Monster Prom has wild fantasy and monster themes, which was great, but they actually really wanted the game to feel relatable and tied to millennial everyday life. And they did that using fashion. It became their thematic anchor. And they got inspiration from the real world, which was really nice. And finally, another way you can learn to integrate more fashion into your games or anything else is to hire diverse developers. A more diverse team means more diverse opinions, ideas, and interests, which in turn attracts a more diverse audience. Overall, to me, fashion is excitement found through exploration and self-discovery. It finds power in aesthetic and the fantasy. So it's a whole new style of play worth doing well. Thanks.
Hello.
Hello.
I have kind of a silly question.
Okay. I like silly questions.
This is related to the fact that the market doesn't see very many fashion games, which you've obviously thought a bit about. So I was hoping that you could tell us if you could take one of your favorite kind of mainstream games and make it that game but fashion, what game would it be and how would you do it?
Oh, that's difficult. There's so many games I like. Whoa, what if... Sorry, what if Untitled Goose Game but fashion? What if you could dress up the goose in so many different ways? And I don't know if you can dress up the goose, don't tell me, I haven't finished the game yet. So I would love that, I'm just saying. And they have the sock that is also a goose. That's what I'm thinking of.
Would the outfits dictate whether or not you could complete certain goals?
Yeah, and it's like Hitman, where like you can only sneak in if you're a certain type of goose.
All right.
Hello.
So if you're working on like a narrative game with characters and stuff, and you dress up the characters specifically for that character, do you think it takes away from it or adds to it if you let the player dress them up? Because in a way that could take away the carefully constructed character you've made. You know
Yeah,
what
I
mean?
think. Oh, sorry. I don't know if you're done.
That's it.
Yeah, so I mean, it depends on obviously what kind of game you have, but I think even being able, so there, if you have a character that has a certain type of mood, like Sunder, oh, it's not there. There's a guy with the leather jacket and he was shirtless. If let's say we wanted to give them different options to dress him up if they didn't like the way he looked, I think there's ways to express your personality through clothes, right? So like we all don't just wear one outfit every single day. There's other options you could pick, and give them different options, like maybe different jackets, give Sunder a shirt, let's say. There's a lot of ways you can give them fashion options without necessarily, destroying the mood of your character.
Thank you.
First of all, love Nikki, love it. I guess one question I have is that we're, to a certain extent, in a lot of mainstream games, we already have the idea of wearables affecting a player's stats and affecting the character's stats, like strength and dex. What are some recommendations you would have about how we can take that sort of basic model and bring it into more the fashion space and maybe more of the social space? So, for example, wearing this will increase your charm or your sexiness or whatever. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions about that?
If I properly understand the question, it's are we asking like how to better make a fashion game?
I suppose it's more, how can we take the model of wearing armor to increase your physical stats in a game and change that into wearing fashion to change your, I guess, social stats or other stats in a game?
I mean, so I'm not a game designer, to be very clear here. So that's why I'm like, please make a fashion game so I don't have to think about this. But I mean, already like the way you were talking about it, like I could see that working well, and like even if it's a dating sim option or other, not just dating sims, obviously. But just I've seen like Diablo, even though your stats are affected by your clothing, that you can transmogrify them so that they look the way you want them to. I don't know if that's necessarily what you're asking, but I think there's a lot of different ways you can integrate clothes into games. And I'm just not a game designer in order to answer that for you. Sorry.
No problem.